Thank you, Mary Ann, for your words of introduction. I'm very happy to be here with all of you this morning. And for my talk, I've decided to adopt the theme of the General Assembly, which is adapting teacher learning modalities to the new normal. And I added a subtitle, Questions for Discussions and Decisions. Because what I'm hoping to do is to be able to engage in some kind of discussion to help all of us make our decisions, the decisions we need to make for the transition to the new normal. No? But I'd like to begin by running a short and simple poll. It's just one question. I'm going to launch it now on Zoom. And it's just one question. And the question is, what has been your school's biggest challenge in the shift to distance learning? So it's anonymous. We won't know who answered what, but please just choose one. Is it unreliable internet access for students and faculty? Is it the faculty's lack of skills, preparations, and delivery of instruction in distance learning? Difficulty in ensuring student learning? Too much workload for students? Too much workload for teachers and administrators? No? Limited budget or decreasing enrollment? It's just good for me, I think, before I speak, to know the context of the group that is gathered here. So I'll give you a minute just to fill it out. I know there are almost 1,000 people who are in the Zoom room, but let's just see how fast we can get some responses. It's not a scientific survey, so we don't have to worry about generalizability and all that. No, but it'll give me a sense of where people are after what we've been through the last year of the pandemic. So I'll give you a minute for that. Okay, almost half of you, about half of you have already answered the poll, but let me just go on for a while before I stop the poll. No, so last year, because of the pandemic, we found ourselves as unwilling participants in what we now know was a global teaching experiment. No, it was global because the pandemic was global in scope. No? It was a teaching experiment because most of us did not know what we were doing. No? We were trying to find out what was the best way to respond to this pandemic. No? And for those of us who had the privilege of having internet, reliable internet connection for our students and faculty, we were able to go online. But also for so many in the country where there was no such thing, no? They had to resort to printing hard copies of modules. No? So we were all really scampering to respond to this, the challenges, this unforeseen challenge of the pandemic. No? And of course, many of us really engaged in a lot of training, upskilling ourselves, trying to learn what the skills that we need to learn in order to shift to remote learning. No? And also, many of us were engaged in module making, whether the modules were actually for online, for the online platform or for hard copies of modules. No? So maybe at this point, I can stop the poll already and just sort of check the results. You might be interested also in seeing the results. So let me share the results. No? So if we look at the results, the highest, almost half of you said difficulty in ensuring student learning. No? I'm really happy about this response because this shows us that our heart is in the right place. No? The most important thing, after all, in our mission of education is to promote student learning. No? And many of us, many of you, almost half of you felt that this was the greatest challenge because we were new in the online platform, we were new in remote learning. It was very difficult to ensure student learning. No? This is followed very closely by unreliable internet access of students and faculty. I mentioned that earlier, that for many schools, there was this handicap of not having a reliable Wi-Fi connection, not only for students, but also for faculty. As a result, learning modules could not be posted online, but at the same time, even communication was not easy. Whereas before we had our students in person in the classroom, it was so much easier to communicate. Now it is there were also challenges in that. Tied for the second place is decreasing enrollment. No? I think many of our schools experience this, partly because there was really difficulty in terms of livelihood for our people. No? So tuition fees could not be afforded. For some, it was also because some parents or students preferred to take a break or decided to go elsewhere, no, because of the online learning platform. And then this was followed by too much workload for teachers and administrators. 1/3 of you said that, no? 33%. And I could not agree more, no? I think last year was really a super stressful year for us teachers and administrators, no? And of course, the faculty's lack of preparation, delivering instruction in distance learning. So thank you very much for participating in the poll. But basically, the poll sort of confirms many of the impressions we have, no, about the challenges that we faced last year, no. So last year we engaged in a lot of training. Many of us were Zoomed out or webinared out, no, and we worked extra hard. No, we exerted double effort, no, in terms of our teaching job because we also had to make modules, no. And now after over a year, just when we thought we were getting the hang of online distance learning, what happens? Now slowly we have to adjust to the new normal, no. This new normal where maybe it's more possible now to bring in students, no? CHED, DepEd, and the Department of Health, IATF are now beginning to issue guidelines for us to be able to accommodate our students back on campus, no? But what's wrong with this new normal? What's wrong with it is that we don't really know what it is, no? We don't know how long the transition will last, no? We don't know how soon we can really go back to normal in terms of 100% of in-person attendance, no? Just as we were also completely taken by surprise by the pandemic and also by how long it took, no? We have no way of knowing what the new normal will look like, no? And for this reason, I'd like to say that that's why the other reason why the subtitle here that I decided to put for my talk is questions for discussion and decisions, no? And the operative term here is questions. I'm not here to give you prescriptions, no? But just to offer you questions for your considerations as you begin to make decisions in the transition to face-to-face learning, given your institution's context and constraints, no? In short, I'm hoping that the ideas that I share with you, the questions, will just help you sort of think about your own context, your own constraints, no? And hopefully will be guided in the decisions you have to make. I'm hoping that you will not expect a kind of GPS from this talk because I'm not an expert in the new normal. No one is. All of us are learning. Just as we were learning last year, we were fumbling along the way, you know. This year, this year, as we try to transition to face-to-face, we will also be learning along the way. We will be learning by doing, no? So I hope you're not expecting, some kind of a GPS from this talk where you will be given very specific directions, like turn left, turn right here, and make a U-turn there. That's not possible in this talk. Rather, I think a better metaphor or a better image for this talk is some kind of explorer's map, no? And an explorer's map is a map with a lot of blanks, no? A lot of empty spaces. And the reason is we don't know what's out there in the new normal. And part of the process is for us educators to fill in the maps, just as we did last year. Last year, we also had some kind of explorer's map. There were a lot of blanks, a lot of unknowns. But as we went through last year, we began to learn lessons, no? We began to learn from our experiences, even from our mistakes, no? And hopefully we were able to reflect on our experiences and we're now able to fill out those empty spaces in the map. That's how we need to proceed also for this transition to the new normal, okay? So obviously, the ideas and suggestions and questions that I will be sharing with you come from our perspective and our context. I've been working very closely with Rita Atienza, the director of the Ateneo Teacher Center, and Galvin Ngo of the Ateneo Salt Institute. But what's important here is what's your context and perspective, no? Every school has every institution has a different context and perspective. So it's important as I share with you my thoughts, no, and my questions. It's important that you think about your context and perspective and try to make the adjustments, no. Feel free to reject whatever is not applicable, no, and feel free to revise whatever will be more helpful for you, no. I'm very excited about this talk, even as I'm also nervous, because I think in this virtual room here on Zoom, but also on YouTube and Facebook, no, We have gathered here a lot of experienced educators and administrators. So what we have in this virtual space is an accumulated wisdom of practice, wisdom that we've been able to build from our practice of teaching and running schools. No? So I'm hoping that you will be very willing to share your experiences and insights and lessons just as we are going along. No? So we know there's a chat box, so please feel free to react to anything I say in real time. Just put your comments there. I'm also encouraging you to respond to one another, to discuss one another on the chat box on Zoom or the comment section of YouTube or Facebook, no? To respond to one another and have your own discussion. No? I'm hoping that we will have what we call productive noise in the chat room and in the comment box. No? We want productive noise among our students because learning happens when our students make productive noise, when they talk to one another about the ideas that we are sharing. And because of the, I think, privileged status of the members in this audience, I hope we will take advantage of that. So my job here is really just to provoke you to think about your experiences, the lessons you've learned, and to provoke you to share your ideas. Some of you, a number of you may have already done a lot of work, no, in terms of preparing for this transition to the new normal. No? So my talk will have three parts. No? The first will be, what models can we consider as we adjust to the new normal? No? There are many models out there and many terms, no? And sometimes, I don't know about you, but in preparing for this talk and in preparing for our own courses of action in our university, I've gotten really confused, no? Because there's so much terminology and the terminology is not used consistently. No? So what I'm hoping to do is to curate some of the best ideas I've encountered, no? And to propose to you a vocabulary we can use so that we can understand one another. No? Because it's gotten to the point that sometimes the terms mean differently and it's not easy to understand each other if that's the case. No? So as I use the terms, please don't be distracted by the terms. Look at the description and use whatever term you want to use. No? But I think it's important to suspend our what we've learned so far about the term so we can have a common language. No? So the first part will be models that we can consider. No? The second part will be questions that we can ask as we are making decisions about which models to adopt, no, for our transition to face-to-face slowly, no. And finally, just a reminder: temptations to resist, no, that there are certain temptations that that we might be vulnerable to. So it's just important to sort of be mindful of what pitfalls, no, we can avoid. And so we won't make mistakes in our decisions. No? So as I said earlier, if you look at the literature, it's a rather inconsistent and confusing. And part of the reason is that it's so new. No? The field is really new and there are new ideas coming up all the time. So it's important for us to define our terms. No? If you look at this image, you can see that the teacher, no, is already pulling her hair because of so many terms. No, there's a confusion of terms. There's a chaos of terms. No, there's hybrid, blend flex, hybrid flex, high flex, blended, whatever else. No, so I'm hoping that the first part of my talk will help us clarify what are some of the words we can use, no, so that we can understand one another. Of course, you can decide to use your own terms later on. Just make sure that everyone in your institution understands the terms correctly or in the same way. No? So maybe what will be helpful is to begin with some kind of continuum. No? These different models can fall between these two extremes. No? And these two extremes, we all have an experience in already. No? Of course, on the left side, on the left extreme, we have the face-to-face. This is the traditional, fully on-site mode of learning. We're all experts in this for many years, for decades. This has been our experience. No? But suddenly last year, because of the pandemic, many of us went fully virtual, no? Which means either online or remote. No? And this was because of necessity. It wasn't because we wanted to do it, no? But we were forced to do that. So let me begin by sort of refreshing our memory about these two, just to clarify what the two ends are. Because the other models I will talk about will fall within the continuum. And I think it's helpful to see whether the models are closer to the traditional, fully on-site mode of learning, or if they fall much closer to the more online mode of learning. No? So obviously, the first two are very familiar to us, face-to-face learning. It's traditional. We were taught that way. We taught that way. It's our default. That was our mode pre-pandemic, with the exception of very few. No, most of us relied completely on face-to-face. No, and then of course during the pandemic, this last over more than a year, no, we've engaged in off-site learning, as we saw in the poll earlier. Many of us here, no, actually. We did not have Wi-Fi, could not rely on Wi-Fi or internet for our students and faculty. So we had to rely on maybe alternative modes like modules, hard copies. No, so a lot of creativity happened there, and there's also a lot of I think things that were learned there that we can draw from. No, but many of us also engage in online. That was our response to the pandemic. No, so what I want, the only point I want to make here is that in both cases, we had no choice. No? We had no choice about the face-to-face learning because that's all we knew before. But during the pandemic, we also had no choice but to resort to either online or modules because we also had no choice. No? We had to continue to offer education. We had to continue to offer learning to our students in the best way possible. No? So in both cases, we had no choice. But here's the point. But after acquiring skills and experience teaching online or remotely, I think we can be more flexible and selective now that we're thinking of going back to face-to-face. No? Instead of simply going back to business as usual, maybe it's good to just keep in mind, no, that all the things we learned during this year of the pandemic, some of the best practices, some of the insights we gleaned from our experience, maybe we can think about them and foreground them as we begin to plan how we will transition to face-to-face. You know? So I'm just putting it out there. And later on, I will ask some questions to help us think about those. No? So those will be the two extremes, no? In terms of the continuum, the traditionally fully on-site and the pandemic fully virtual. Now, let me introduce to you the first model that's in between the two, no? And I'm calling it blended, no? Again, blended usually is a term that's used generically. Anything that has a combination of online and on-site will be called blended. But for this particular session, and based on some literature, the term blended learning is reserved only for those that are closer to the fully on-site, where people are in the classroom. Let me explain that. No? So blended learning can be called technology enriched. You're using technology to enrich the face-to-face classes, okay? So it employs the incorporation of technology into face-to-face instruction. So there are online, usually asynchronous tasks, but these are posted online only to augment face-to-face. So very clearly, what is primary here is face-to-face. No? So in blended learning, according to this definition, no, classes are still primarily face-to-face, and you use digital technology, use online learning, the online platform, only to supplement, to add, to enrich what's going on in the classroom. It's only a support. No? For example, we have the usual schedule, MWF or everyday, whatever the schedule is, no? And I have face-to-face, no? We have the usual lectures or activities or whatever else teachers do. And today we do a lot of things face-to-face. There's so much we can do today, no? But in addition to that, I may post readings and other materials online. For example, a text, I may tell students you may want to read this, but it's already posted online, no? Or I can show another video that I don't have time for during class. So these other videos can be watched by our students, no? I can ask my students to discuss the materials if I want to, so there can be interactive tasks, no? And other supplementary discussions. So the first model I'm talking about, blended learning, which I'm calling blended learning, is very similar to, is much closer to face-to-face, no? To fully on-site, no? However, it makes use of some online tools and technology already. So it's only a supplement, no? Now let's go to the other side. No? The other side we will call online plus, no? Online plus. So this one is you can see it's in the opposite end of the continuum. It's closer to the fully virtual. No? The term used for this in the literature is enriched virtual. No? So this would be the opposite of blended. No? Whereas blended learning is technology enriched, and where the online technology is only a supplement to face-to-face, here it's the other way around. It's the reverse. No? It's now primarily online learning plus on-site when desirable and only when desirable. So in general, the learning is mostly online, basically what we've been doing, or remote, basically what we've been doing in the last year. No? So it's synchronous and asynchronous, but once in a while, there will be on-site, not for the whole semester, not for the whole quarter or term, but just once in a while. For example, if there's a laboratory experiment, no? And it makes sense for the students to be asked to come into class, no, so that they can go to because obviously there are no lab facilities at home, no. I know that many science teachers were very creative in coming up with alternatives last year, no. But now that in person is allowed, maybe these are some of the special activities that we can invite students to come in, no. Of course, library facilities, no. I know librarians have also worked very hard to make sure that resources are available online, but maybe there are certain hard copies which cannot be digitalized for whatever reason, no? Especially archival materials. Maybe graduate students, no, will benefit from actually physically being in the library, no, to work there. Maybe Wi-Fi access, no? Maybe some homes have difficulty having Wi-Fi. So some schools like Xavier School in San Juan, for example, are coming up with what they call learning hubs, where students may come to class, no, may come to campus and work there, no, work independently, but have the benefit of the more reliable Wi-Fi access available in school. No, examinations. No, one of the big issues about last year is how do we make sure that students really take the test properly, you know, to use a euphemism. No? So maybe if that's important, maybe some examinations, no? Major examinations can be taken on-site, no? Especially high-stakes examinations, or maybe oral exams, no? For example, in philosophy. If there will be a value added there, that might be something we can invite students to, no? Or whatever other rich learning experiences you can think of that you think there will be a value added if the learning experience is done in school rather than merely on-site, online or remote. No? Okay, so that would be the online plus or enrich virtual. We have two more models. No? The next model we will call hybrid. No? And as you can see from this continuum, hybrid is much closer to the middle. No? Again, there's a lot of usage for hybrid, but for this particular talk, I'd like to specify what I mean by hybrid. No? And I didn't come up with this meaning. This came from the literature, but you have to curate. No? So because otherwise there are so many meanings. No? So hybrid learning refers to a more strategic combination of face-to-face and remote learning to enhance learning. No? So here the teacher is more flexible. No? Whereas before, in blended, for example, if you go back to the continuum, in blended, the teacher is really more on-site, more face-to-face, and online plus, for some reason, maybe because of the pandemic, the teacher is more online. In hybrid, if there's that possibility to bring more people, to bring the students to class, no, there's greater flexibility, no, on the part of the teacher. No? So here, the teacher is choosing to go online or face-to-face, not because that's what he or she is supposed to do, but it's more strategic. That's the more suitable mode to promote learning. No? So if for a particular topic, for example, on face-to-face is better, then I will go on-site, no? and invite the whole class to come to class, no? And actually discuss that particular topic. If the topic can be done online because it requires, self-paced learning, we want our students to individually reflect on the ideas and wrestle with the ideas a bit more on their own without the pressure of what's happening in class, in person, then maybe I'll go online for that. No? So that would be hybrid learning. So again, as you can see already, I'm using the terms a bit more technically, maybe in a way different from the way you're using it. But I'm doing that just so we can understand each other and make some sense of the the avalanche of terminology that's going on in the literature. No? So hybrid learning, as I said earlier, the teacher chooses the mode considered more suitable or effective for the topic or the instructional method. Here's an example which I learned only last year because I had to go online. No? The active and collaborative reading of an important text where students share annotations. No? So some of you may be familiar with tools like Perusal. No? Perusal is an app where students can be grouped together in maybe groups of 4 and 5. So you assign them a chapter in a book, for example, obviously available in PDF. No? And you ask them to annotate the text together. For example, you tell them, highlight 3 of the most important statements there and pose 2 questions in maybe a couple of paragraphs where you need help for clarification. No? Before the pandemic, before I learned to do this, no, I would just assign readings to my students. O magbasa na kayo, finish the reading. Of course, most of them probably did not even read it, no? Or the hashtag, right? TLDR, too long did not read, no? So maybe there's no way for me to find out if they're reading it, no? But one of the nice learnings I acquired last year was there are certain online apps that we can use where you can actually have the reading of the student recorded, and not just any reading, but active reading. You can see them, you can see their thinking, no? Their thinking becomes visible as they're reading the text because they're annotating, they're highlighting. At the same time, they can collaborate with one another. So for someone like me, if I want to employ hybrid learning, no, I would not spend too much time discussing the entire text, maybe face-to-face, but I would just assign it online. Because there I can see the discussion among them and maybe just pick out a couple of ideas or pressing questions that can be discussed face-to-face. No? So there's greater selectivity, there's greater discernment possible in hybrid learning. No? So students, and at the same time, students can seamlessly shift from face-to-face to online learning because both modes are readily available. I think this is the beauty of hybrid learning. No? The beauty here is that the teacher should make sure that whatever is done face-to-face is also available online, no? So that it's easier for students to shift. So for example, if suddenly, for whatever reason, we cannot meet face-to-face, like I got sick or there was a strike, no? Then we can just go online much more easily than before the pandemic. No? So let me just point out that in hybrid learning, all the students in your class engage in either online or in person. No? So let's say I have a class of 40. No? The class of 40 should be face-to-face if I want them to be face-to-face, or they will be online if I feel that the topic or the instructional method is more effective online. So clearly, hybrid learning may not be suitable to this transition period because some class sizes, most class sizes in the Philippines, I think, no, are going to exceed the allowable capacity given the guidelines that we have to follow for health protocol. No? So hybrid learning is that. No? Now, there's another alternative to hybrid learning, no? Which can, I think, better respond to our situation where we can't accommodate the entire class. No? And this I would like to call flex. No? And many of you, I'm sure, have read about hybrid flex or high flex, blended flex or blend flex. No, but to be honest with you, I feel there's no need to make the distinction, really. No, just to make sure we understand. No, hybrid flex or high flex means the students have a choice. No, so so the teacher makes sure that there's an online mode of learning. There's also face-to-face. There are, for example, I have classes 3 times a week, MWF. No. But the students have a choice. No? For example, student A may say, I feel like going to class today, so I will attend the Monday class. But on Wednesday, I don't feel like going. I'll just go online. So there's complete choice on the part of the student, no? Which I don't think is possible. No? And I don't think it's something we want to do. Personally, as a teacher, I don't really want to do that at this point, no? Because it's going to be too confusing. The blend flex is sometimes used synonymously with high flex. That's why it's confusing. But there's also a use of blend flex where students don't have a choice, but they're assigned to groups, no? On rotation for on-site classes. And aside from that, they have online class. I think this is probably more suitable to our situation. But for the sake of our discussion, huwag na natin pag-usapan ng high flex or blend flex. Let's just talk about flex. No, I think flex learning. If you will agree, at least for this talk, can we just use the term flex learning for both high flex and blend flex? No? So basically, the idea here is there are three different modes of participation available to the students. No? The students can be on-site. The students can be attending classes synchronously. No? And the students can be doing tasks asynchronously at their own time. No? What is crucial here is that whereas in the hybrid learning, all the students in your class, no, have to go to class in person if the teacher feels it's best, no? And they do online if the teacher feels that that's best. In this case, no, in every class, when I'm holding a class on a Monday, for example, I will have a mix of online, on-site students who are in the class physically, and also online students. No? So let's try to imagine that. What would that look like? If I'm teaching, let's say, science, technology, and society, no? And I have a class of, let's say, 50. Usually STS is a big enrollment because it's a required GE course. No? Let's say I have a class of 60. No? I obviously cannot accommodate 60 in one class physically at one time. No? So some of them have to be online, right? So this would be a possible setup. No? I will have a mix of both online and on-site students. No? So as a teacher, as you can see in the upper left, no? So let's call this concurrent teaching because the teacher is teaching both on-site students, those who are present physically, and those who are online concurrently. So the teacher has to interact with both on-site students, those in the blue circles who are present physically in the classroom, no? And online students. No? You will see in the screen, no? On the right side, you will see little windows. Those are the Zoom windows, for example. No? So the setup might look like this. There are many ways of setting up, but maybe the most basic setup is the teacher's computer is projecting the slides of the teacher on a screen, no? As well as some of the online students in the Zoom. No? So the students who are on site, who are present in the classroom, no? Obviously they're seated 6 feet apart, right? They can see the teacher physically, no, who's present in the classroom, no, but also they can see the slides of the teacher on the screen, as well as some of the online students there. Okay, so this is what it might look like if we go flex learning. Now, who is going to be in the classroom is going to be online? That's a discussion we can have a little bit later. No? In fact, actually, in the next slide. No? So let me go to the next slide. So, but what's important at this point is to imagine if you were the teacher, you're teaching concurrently. No? So if the setup was merely face-to-face, all your students are there, right? If the setup is purely online, all your students are online, and so are you. But flex learning, regardless of how you decide who's going to be on-site or not, no? Some of your students are online, some of your students are on-site. So in a way, it will call for even more multitasking on the part of the teacher, okay? So in flex learning, students may be grouped and allowed on campus on a rotation basis. So again, there are many ways of grouping students, and it's up to the educators to decide depending on your context and your constraints. No? When we go through the questions to ask later, we will rediscuss this, but here are some examples of ways you can group your students. You may just want to prioritize students who are at risk of failing, no? Students who need remediation. Maybe they're the ones you will ask to come face-to-face. No? The others can stay online, but maybe because of your classroom capacity, you will only ask those students who need extra help, who need special attention, okay? Or you may want to decide on key grade levels, no? You may want to prioritize early education, no? As we know, the earlier grades have difficulty during online and remote because the parents have to be there, no? So maybe you may want to prioritize. If, for example, a school decides to prioritize early education, no, and only early education, there will be more classrooms available, no, for the kindergarten students in grade 1, no, because the other grade levels will not be coming in. So you can actually spread them out and really sort of focus on them. No? There might be others who may not be able to attend despite that, and they will be allowed online. No? So there's continuity of learning, right? Or you may want to focus on terminal years. No? For example, you may say, you know, our seniors are graduating. It'll be so tragic if they're not able to experience, no, learning, as coming back on campus. So you may want to prioritize them as well, no? Or you may want to prioritize the transition years, no? The transition years from grade school, transition years to senior high school, and so on and so forth, no? You can also group them according to subject areas and courses. No? For example, clearly, because the laboratories are so important and they cannot really be done readily at home, no? You may want to prioritize science classes, no? Or you may want to prioritize certain computer or media classes that require more high-end facilities that are not available at home. So these are some of the things you may want to consider when you want to go into flex learning. The last option is, I think, the most popular one because it really includes everyone. The last option is to give everyone a chance to come on campus, no? to experience on-site learning, but everyone will have to be on rotation. No? So there are many ways of doing that. One way is just to do it alphabetically, so all those letter A to, I don't know, G will be on this week, no? And then H to, I don't know, N will be next week. So you have a 3-week cycle, for example. That's one way of doing it. Some people want to do it MWF or whatever, but I think based on the latest guideline from CHED and the Department of Health, it's preferred that we follow a particular cycle, no? So maybe 1 week per batch, 1 batch per week is the best. No? But again, we don't need to go to the nitty-gritty. What's important here is that in flex learning, there are different ways of grouping people. But again, what's important here is that in flex learning, you have both online students and also in-person students. We were talking to some of our friends who are in the US, who are running schools there, and we asked them about their experience. No? Because, for example, in the US, they're now mostly face-to-face, no? Because of vaccination and all that. No? And but they went through a period where they did flex learning. And here's one, I think, one illustration that's going to help us imagine more what happens in flex learning. No? According to the people we consulted, no? When you have a purely online mode of learning, no? Obviously, that would be the red bar on the left. No? Obviously, all your students are online, so it's all red. And so it's a particular level of quality. No? So I don't know how you feel about your students' experience online, no? But basically, some of you may feel it's worse than, it's lower than face-to-face. Others may feel it's equal to face-to-face. I don't know, but that's not the point here. The point here is, given this particular level, if you compare it to the other two bars on the right side, the blue bar and the red bar, the experience of our colleagues in the US is that those who tried to employ the flex learning approach, no? The on-site students found the experience better than when they were online, but the students who were actually online, no, during the flex, found their experience worse than when everybody was online. No? So that was the experience. I don't know how it's going to be, but we can imagine why that's the case. No? Because what's going to happen is that if everyone was online, if everyone turns on his or her video, everyone's going to see everyone. So the experience is equal. No? But if you're an online student and there are on-site students, all you're going to see is the class, no? And you may not be able to hear everyone, no? And according to our friends also, usually when a teacher is attending to both students who are present physically and those online, many of the times, unless a teacher makes an extra effort, the online students are neglected. And I can understand that. If I were a teacher and I'm thinking about my slides, my lecture, and I'm paying attention to my students in front of me, and I still have online students, most probably I will neglect the online students unless I'm trained and prepared to make sure that I also pay attention to them. Okay? So these would be, in summary, I think, the more useful models we can talk about, no, when we think about the transition to the new normal. No? So in summary, we have the fully on-site on the extreme left, no? And we have the fully virtual on the extreme right? And then in between, we have 4 models, no? And they fall in the continuum depending on how close they are to the on-site or the online. So the question here is, for the transition period, which model or combination of models is most suitable for your context, your students and your institution? No? Now, please note that you need not choose only one model. No? You can choose one model or a combination of models, and you can, like assign those models to different groups of students or different subject areas. No? In general, I think if we want a general idea, those models that fall in front of the red box, I would say are possible, no? With only one caveat, no? The hybrid, if you remember, hybrid learning, all the students should be, in principle, on site. They should be in person, no? If they can actually be in person. So that might be limited only to courses or classes with small size. No? So if you have a student, let's say you have a course, you're teaching a course of only 20 students, you can actually go hybrid, no? Because 20 can be easily accommodated in ordinary classroom, or 16 to 20, depending on how the school goes. Okay, so again, in summary, these are the models that you can consider. I was very deliberate in the use of my terms so that we will not end up with a cacophony of terminologies. No, I think it might be useful to to have this diagram, to have this continuum, so when we make our decisions, we're clear about whether the model we're going to use is closer to the in-person, the pre-pandemic in-person, or closer to the online or remote. Okay. Now, let me just say this, and I think this is a very important point. No, some scholars make a distinction between well-structured problems and ill-structured problems. No? A well-structured problem has one and often clearly verifiable solution. An ill-structured problem does not have a clear solution. So what is needed is not to find the right answer, if there's such a thing, but to exercise our judgment. Given your best lights, given all the people you've consulted with, what do you think is the best solution, without the certainty that that's the correct solution? I say this because even in the choice of model or models that we will adopt for our transition to face-to-face, that the problem we're facing is not a well-structured problem. It's an ill-structured problem. So let's not go hunting around for the correct answer. There is no one correct answer for all schools or institutions. No? You, given your experience and expertise, you're the best judge as to exercise the judgment as to what model is best, or what combination of models is best for your school, given your context and given your constraints. Okay, so that sort of is the first part of my talk, the models to consider. Again, if you have questions or ideas, please do not wait for the Q&A. Please begin a discussion in the chat box, in the comment box. No, later on, we hope the moderator will be able to fish out the more significant questions, and maybe we can attend to them. Again, I'm not very optimistic I can answer your questions because I am not an expert here. I've never been through the new normal myself. Like you, I'm a fellow learner. No? I'm also learning along the way. Okay, let's go to the next part. But the next part of my talk would be questions to ask. What questions can we ask to guide us in our discussion and decision making? And I put here, I added a couple of adjectives there, no? Technical and adaptive questions. No? Heifetz and Linsky are great authors of leadership books, no? And they're my idols. No? And they make a distinction between technical questions and adaptive questions. And they're very similar to well-structured questions and ill-structured questions. Technical questions, we will need to answer some technical questions to help us make decisions. No? But the technical questions are well-structured questions. Usually there's an easily verifiable answer. All we need to do is consult the technical experts, no? And we can get the answer. No? But the adaptive questions do not have an easily verifiable solution. And it's going to be complex. It's going to be characterized by complexity. It's going to be characterized by uncertainty. So please, I hope all of us, if we haven't done that yet in the pandemic, I hope all of us will make a decision now to be comfortable with ambiguity, because that's what we're going to face even in the transition. No? So adaptive questions, some of these questions are adaptive, and usually it's because they involve people. No? Whenever questions involve people, the question becomes more complex, the question becomes more uncertain, and the question becomes adaptive. Okay? So let's go through some of the questions I thought of. You might be able to think of other questions. And again, please feel free to share what your questions are. But I have a number of questions I think that might help us. At least it's helping us in our own institution figure out the ways forward. No? The first question is, What are our institution's non-negotiable values and principles? It's very important for us to have a North Star in this complexity and this situation of complexity and uncertainty. Since we're not sure exactly what the steps forward are, it's important that we look at the mission of our school, no? We look at our identity and say, what is the most important for us? What is non-negotiable? No? As we begin to answer the questions that we have to face, no? And solve the problems that we have to solve, no? What are some of what can serve as our anchor? No? Our North Star. No? So for example, clearly in the pandemic, the health and safety of our students and faculty is a clear non-negotiable. No? In fact, we don't really have a choice. Even if it's not your non-negotiable, the government's going to insist on this, and thankfully so. No? So health and safety. Secondly, quality learning. No? What do we consider high quality learning? No? Whatever the situation will be, whatever mode of learning we're going to adopt, no? We want the learning. And as we saw in the poll, that our heart's in the right place. No? Most of us chose the difficulty of assuring student learning was our biggest challenge. No? And that should be really our main mission. No? So how do we make sure, how do we not dilute the learning of our students? No? There were a lot of learning deficits that happened last year. According to the UN study, there's a lot of learning deficit despite our best efforts. And that's a given. There's nothing more we could have done. No? But what's important is that we exert our best effort, even this new normal, to promote quality learning, whatever that means, given our resources. No? Inclusion was a very important part of the discussion in many schools. No? How do we make sure that there's no student left behind? And at the same time, no faculty left behind. No? So I know of universities and schools that lent devices to their students and faculty, that gave pocket Wi-Fis whenever it could be afforded, no, to make sure that everyone's included. Compassion is also non-negotiable for many institutions, no, especially during the pandemic. We consulted, the Ateneo consulted our resident psychologists before we even crafted our response to the pandemic, and all of them said that in the pandemic, even if you're not directly affected in terms of members of your family getting infected or dying, or yourself getting infected, there is already a lot of stress. No? So we cannot expect the same level of productivity as the pre-pandemic levels. It's not realistic. It's not compassionate to do that. No? So again, how much adjustment are we going to make in terms of what we demand from our teachers and students during this pandemic? Something to think about, no? Because as we make our decisions later on, as we grapple with some of the other more concrete questions, this will come in handy. No? Our non-negotiable values and principles. Student wellness, there are overlaps here, no? But student wellness, of course, is very important. No? That's why we need to be compassionate. We need to include them. But I added here also faculty and staff wellness. No? I think all of you will agree. No, it was number 2 in our poll. No, a lot of hard work. No, many of us were close. We're on the brink of burnout if we're not yet on. If we did not actually burn out. No, so faculty and staff wellness is also an important non-negotiable. So I think a conversation in your leadership team or in the school about what's non-negotiable in terms of values and principles for your school will go a long way as you look at the terrain that's lying ahead of us. No? So because they will serve as criteria for your decision making. Because in most complex questions and adaptive problems, what happens really is what we encounter is a tension or a tension between two values. No? For example, in many schools, the debates have been about how much rigor and how much compassion. Those are two very valuable things. No? We want rigor in learning, but we also want compassion. But how much of each? No? And really, trying to answer this question is really a process of clarifying in this context, which is more important. No? Both are good. Rigor in learning is good. Compassion is good. But you cannot have 100% of each. No? So that process of wrestling with that question is really the process we'll be going through as we have last year. So it's very important for us to define the non-negotiable values and principles of our institutions because they will guide us as we go through the more specific questions. No? So that's the first question. Second question, what do our stakeholders think and feel about the transition to on-site. It's good to have a conversation with them. No, it's good to check out how they feel. No, our students. No, I check with my students, my college students, and they're all raring to come back. No, they all want to come back. But check also with the faculty. How do they feel about coming back on site? No, this might be a bit mixed. No, because there are studies going on in the US that a lot of employees, not just educators, a lot of employees have found that it's possible to work from home, and it's so much easier without traffic and all that. So they actually prefer to work from home. No? So I think some kind of conversation, maybe negotiation, needs to happen here, no, for our faculty. I don't know exactly. I haven't really done a survey or asked people, but I don't know how faculty feel about coming back on site. There might be some valid concerns, but others may just have preferences. No? What about parents? How do they feel, no? Given the age of their children? This might be different. No? So faculty choice and readiness, no, to come back on site, no, that's important. No? Student and parent preferences, there's health concerns, travel concerns. So these are all important things to consider as we are sort of crafting the way forward. Our stakeholders are very important. No? A third question, and I think this is a very important question. No? What did we learn and do well during the pandemic? No? I know the pandemic was traumatic for some of us, no? Myself included. No? But maybe there were some good things as well. No? Maybe we stumbled over some best practices. Maybe we learned something that can really help us become better educators, regardless of the mode of learning, whether online or face-to-face. So I put some examples here. Educational technology skills. I learned so much. I had to learn, no? I learned so many tools, and I thought I was already digitally sophisticated, no? But I learned so much in terms of educational technology. I think most, if not all, our teachers really leveled up in terms of educational technology. Okay. What about those skills? What about those tools and strategies can we keep and strengthen as we prepare to go back face-to-face? No? Better course design. For me, this is the number one learning for me. No? I was able to learn how to design my courses better. Whereas before, I could actually survive by being a page ahead of my students. I have a syllabus, more or less. I have a plan, more or less. This time, I had to make sure that my course was written up. No? Either online in a learning management system like Moodle or Canvas or Schoology, or it's in a module, right? So I had to really prepare a bit more. No? And so the course design, I was able to improve my course in terms of structure, in terms of the variety of tasks and experiences I will offer my students. No? That's a very valuable learning. No? I'm not going to just forget it. I'm hoping I'll be able to use it, no, as I go back to face-to-face. No? Online participation. Many people were kind of skeptical about online participation, that, the students are not going to participate. When I'm on Zoom, their videos are off. They're not really talking. But there are some bright lights as well. Now, for example, I noticed that in my classes, when, I used to teach, for my STS class, for example, in UP, I would have an auditorium, and the class would have about 80 to 100 sometimes because, it's a required course, right? So they have to attend. But recitation was difficult because it's always the usual suspects. No? The more extroverted ones were always raising their hands, unless you want to do cold calls and call on people who don't recite. No? But what I noticed online is that when you have a discussion board, no, it's an asynchronous. You post a question and you say, in no more than 3 sentences or 5 sentences. I limit it because I don't want to read a thesis. No, in no more than 5 sentences, answer this question. Obviously, the more introverted ones also participate, and more than that, they participate rather substantially, which is surprising. No? Because they wouldn't ever open their mouth in class, but online on Canvas or Moodle, if you give them, a scaffold like, 5 sentences, they will actually share. And some of them share really substantially and even personally, rather personally. Some of our colleagues in the US have shared with us that one thing they've noticed is that sharing online is more personal for whatever reason. So if you're teaching literature or theology or philosophy, somehow the quality of sharing, for whatever reason, maybe it's the illusion of anonymity, for some reason, people are able to share more deeply. I don't know about your experience. No? Independent learning. I think Now it can be told. I think our learners were not independent. No, that's why so many had difficulty adjusting to online learning because independent learning was not really promoted. But many of them maybe became more independent as a result of the online and the remote. No, teaching became more visible. What do I mean by that? Now you can see how the teacher teaches. No, they have modules and they have online courses. No, and as a result of this, it's more possible now to give feedback for teachers to improve their practice. No, at the same time, teachers can actually collaborate more because it's already visible. No, before my classroom was my fortress. Nobody else knew what was going on, unless my department chair would visit, which is rather rare, I think. No? But now it's all on Canvas or Moodle or Schoology or on the module. So there's greater chances for improvement and also collaboration. So the point here is our best practices and the best lessons we learn, let's continue them and strengthen them as we go think about face-to-face. No? Another question to ask, which learning experiences will have value added if done on-site? And for which students? No? This might guide us. So these are more concrete questions. So for example, in terms of what are the online on-site facilities that students need access to, which they could not be given access to during the remote learning? What learning experiences can have added pedagogical and formative value? So it's not just about learning, it's also about formation, about growth. No? Some special educational needs and other rich experiences. No? Now, McKinsey and UNESCO came up with a study, which I think is very helpful, and we will share with you the resources later. No? According to them, they did a study, and according to them, this would be a partial list of how you might want to prioritize in-person activities. No? High on the list would be ensuring social connection among students. So clearly, it's not really about learning, it's about formation. No? Experiments, because laboratories are not available. Medium priority, small group collaborations and discussions, guided practice where the teacher is available to give feedback, to coach the students as they're practicing something. No? Formal evaluation and feedback, the teacher sits with the students and gives evaluation. No? Low priority, teaching new concepts, independent practice, coaching, and office hours. The point here is these are not the correct answers. These are some of the answers that the scholars have looked at, but you have to come up with your own hierarchy of what would be high priority and what would be low priority. Okay? So, okay, let me just mute everyone. Okay, there you go. So, and then another question to ask is, how do we prepare and support our faculty for the additional modes of learning? For me, this is probably one of the most important questions. No? How do we prepare our faculty in terms of professional development, but also, just as importantly, in terms of psychological support? As we know, it's all about faculty morale. If the morale of our faculty drops below sea level, we're screwed. It's very important for us to keep our faculty motivated and happy. And it's not easy to do given this pandemic. No? So it's important, I think, that we really take time out to think how we're going to prepare and support our faculty. Maybe when we consult them, the consultation becomes an opportunity also for consensus building. It's important we hear what they say. It's important we're all on the same page. It doesn't mean we will agree with everything they say, obviously, but we have to try to convince them to see the value of where we want to go. But we need to listen to them. No? Again, with regard to the flex learning, which is probably what most of us will do in the transition, no? When we talk to our colleagues in the US, here's what they have to say. No? They said, in terms of the expected level of teacher stress, when it was purely online, it was that level, the blue bar. During the flex, it was much higher. And that's understandable because as a teacher, I now have to attend not only to my online students, but also to my on-site students. No? So it will call for more from the teacher. So it's important we prepare them and we support them. Okay. Now let's go to the more technical questions. The questions earlier are more adaptive. They're the more complex questions that involve people that have no readily available answer. Here are some more technical questions, no, easier to answer given the above. No? What technical requirements and costs will be needed to support the proposed modes of on-site learning? That's rather self-evident. No? So you have to find out what your maximum classroom capacity is, what would be the minimum additional devices. No? So if you have a budget or there's a long-term value in investing, then you may want to invest in more. If you remember, this was the setup for the flex, no? And I said earlier that this would be the minimum setup. I think you have a laptop connected to a projector that projects the slides, as well as the online students on the screen. Some schools and institutions may not even be able to afford this. Other schools are talking about putting an additional mic, so the sound that is made in the classroom is more audible to those online. Some people are talking about an additional camera, a camera that will, focus on the students, no? And some people are even talking about an additional screen to show just the online students. The only thing I want to say is let's not get carried unless you have the money at galit ka sa pera, no? Or there is a long-term value in investing in these devices. It would just be good to be minimalist because we're not sure how long this will last. No, hopefully it'll be short. Hopefully it will not take too long. No, hopefully one semester only next year. No, I'm hoping by summer or next school year we can really have more, if not 100% on-site learning. But again, this is a decision you have to make as administrators. No. Of course, what are the health parameters and protocols that we need to observe? No, guidelines from IATF, CHED, Department of Health, our LGUs. No, are you going to require full vaccination? That's the guideline coming from CHED. So we have to require vaccination of all our employees and students 18 years old and above. There's a gray area for kids, so think about that. No, what classroom and what campus and classroom adjustments you need to make in terms of space, no, for physical distancing. There's a requirement for health insurance, I think. No? So these are technical questions. The answers are easy to find, but you have to apply it obviously to your context. No? Another question: what's the maximum capacity for students allowed on campus and in the classrooms, and how do we manage student traffic? No? So these are some of the maximum capacity given to us from DOH and CHED. No? But I don't need to go through the details, but I think the more crucial question here is not so much the maximum capacity, but how do we manage student traffic on campus? No? This is the more complex question. So because it's easy to peg the numbers, it's easy to come up with a system to monitor how many are coming in or going out, but how do you manage student traffic on campus? During classes, it's easy. You have a maximum of 16 or 20, depending on your classroom size. But what about outside when they leave the classroom? Are you going to police them? Are you going to say they can't congregate? These are I think the more challenging questions. No? Another question: what creative designs can we make on our structure and policies given these contexts and constraints? Last year was an exercise of creativity on our part. No? So I think this year it's important to find out, to continue to do that. No? So for example, if you have a 3-hour class a week, no? Let's say you have 3 1-hour classes in a week. You may want to have only a 3-hour class one day during the week. Things like that. Those are things you can think about. No? For me, this is the most important question to ask. What should be our ideal and long-term mode of learning? It's important for us as we focus on the transition to think of the long term already. No? So looking beyond the transition with our expanded repertoire of teaching tools and strategies, which modality or modalities of learning and teaching should be considered our ideal post-pandemic? Let's not focus only on the transition. Whatever we do in the transition should already bear in mind what we want our school or university to look like after the pandemic. No? So again, we go back to this summary, no, this continuum. Hopefully, no one will only think of fully on-site, na walang online. We've learned so much already in online. No? So I put an X there. I hope you don't mind. No? I hope, for example, Basic Ed might decide, it's up to you, no? Might decide that blended is the best. Remember, blended means it's primarily face-to-face, but you will use a little bit of online to support that. You may decide to do that, no? The higher ed, including senior high school, has a greater repertoire of choices, no? You may want to go flex, you may want to go hybrid, online plus, or Enrich Virtual, or fully virtual, no? So again, I think that's an important discussion because whatever you do for the transition, hopefully, will also move towards, will also already be a step towards your future goal, no? Whatever the desired mode will be. Again, I go back to the well-structured and ill-structured problem. There's no one easily verifiable correct answer to all these questions. No? You need to exercise your judgment given your experience and your expertise. No? Okay, can I just check the time? Do I still have time? I just have one more section, or should I stop already?
Father, you have a lot of time.
Okay, okay, good. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so that's about questions to ask. By the way, we will be sharing with you a handout for these questions for whatever they're worth. It can be a kind of checklist, and as I said, you probably have more questions you may want to add to the list, which will help you in making your decisions. No, so the first one I talked about models to consider. The second section is about questions to ask to help us make our decisions. The third part I called the 4 temptations to resist. No? There are certain temptations that we administrators and educators might be vulnerable to. No? And I just want to mention them, and it's up to you to exercise, to pray for grace and exercise whatever self-control you need to exercise in order to resist these temptations. In some cases, it may be defensible to actually yield to the temptations. But again, it's a judgment you have to make. No? The first temptation, do not be pressured to make rushed decisions. I think it's very important for us to give ourselves some breathing space. No? There's a lot of rush now because of all the guidelines coming out. No? But do not make rush decisions. No? Let's take time to study our options, to consult our stakeholders, if we can, to pilot in phases. No? And then as we're implementing them, to revise and improve as we go along. No? So there's no need to really jump on the bandwagon. No? Unless there's a reason. And what would be the reason? The reason would be if we're problematic in our online learning or we're problematic in our modules. No? If you feel that there's really a major problem, then go ahead. Please make your time, advance your timetable. No? Because compared to last year, I don't know if I'm right. No? I think we are in a relatively stable condition. No? We've already had more than 1 year to adjust to the pandemic. No? And we are still operational. No? We are doing our best. No? So try not to rush unless there's a problem. Okay. There can be an array of possible problems. It's really up to you to think about what the problems are. Some schools might think if we don't rush with going on site, we might lose more enrollment. I think that's a valid problem. That's a valid concern. That's good to think about. No? Again, there's no right answer. There's no one correct answer. No? It's up to you to decide, to make a decision given your context. No? And again, as always, I always say, given your experience and expertise. No? So that's the first temptation. As much as possible, please don't rush just because. No? Some schools are rushing in their planning, but they're not rushing in their implementation. I think that's a great combo. No? To begin thinking already and discussing. No? But implementation, be very prudent how to implement. No? Okay. Second temptation, I talked about this earlier. Don't focus only on the transitional stage or aim only for business as usual. I hope we're not going to go back to just fully in person. No? Na wala nang online. Let's forget about what we learned about educational technology skills and course design. No? Let's work towards the desired long-term goal. No? We're familiar with this phrase in the US, no? Build back better. Let's build back our school, but better, because we've already learned so much. No? Let's not waste all the agony, all the sleepless nights, no? All the modules, time spent coming up with modules, and all the breakthroughs in collaboration that we experienced last year. No? All those skills, all those best practices, let's try to continue to keep them and use them to build our schools back better. Okay, so that's the second temptation. Don't focus only on the transition. Focus on the long term. No? And don't go back to the business as usual. Temptation number 3, don't plan for one size fits all. No? Don't think that just because, for example, one school is doing this, that's what you have to do. No? You have to customize according to your resources and according to your needs. No? Stop comparing yourself to other schools. No? You know what psychologists say, right? When we tend to compare ourselves to other people, we're actually comparing our inside to other people's outside. So what happens? We feel bad because the inside always doesn't look as good as the outside. No? So feel free to customize according to your resources and needs. But don't plan for one size fits all only in terms of your entire school, but also within your school. No? I remember I talked about models and phases, but you can mix them. No? Maybe for the seniors, you do this. Maybe for certain activities or events, you do that. So again, that calls for judgment. There is no recipe. There is no formula for that. No? Here's an example. No? So for example, during the transition, we can't go fully on-site, we can't go blended, no, because that's more fully on-site. You may decide that for phase one, whenever that's going to be, you may want to prioritize at-risk students for certain subjects, no? Like maybe in math, you want to prioritize those having difficulty in maths, for example. You may want to prioritize key grade levels, like maybe the kindergarten and grade one, as well as the seniors. And of course, maybe the laboratories, the libraries, the oral exams. You may want to do that. No? In phase two, you may want to be more using more flex, no? Or you may want to do flex already in phase one. So you may want to already assign students to batches on campus every 3 weeks. So in this example, you have particular combinations and particular phases. No? This is not the right way to go. It's up to you how you want to do this is just an example, no? With no school or university in mind. So for example, let's say your school planned phase one, only online plus, only Enrich Virtual, no? So selected, no? Phase two, let's say for the next academic year, phase two, we will have batches on rotation. It's a very conservative plan. What if suddenly things go well? Well, obviously, if suddenly goes well, we should be happy and just go back to everyone on site, but hopefully not forgetting the lessons we learned, no? So even the plan is flexible in terms of advancing your timetable, no? The last temptation, and very, very important, let's not burn out. Let's pace ourselves. Let's care for ourselves, because that is the most important. Without us educators, the school is going to fall apart. So it's important we pace ourselves and take care of ourselves. And that cannot be said enough. So it's important to include that. That might be a temptation for some of us. No? Some of us who are particularly workaholic. No? Okay, so I'd just like to end by saying that the goal really for the long term is that our educational system will be disruption resilient. Who knows what other kinds of disruptions will happen? When I was a kid growing up, when I was going to school, every time there was a typhoon, when martial law was, for those who believe in martial law, when martial law was declared, no, when there was EDSA revolution, the school was disrupted, everything stopped. No? Now we've learned tricks. We've learned a lot of tricks to help us become more disruption resilient. No? So resiliency, being resilient, is something that we've learned to do this last year. No? So something we should really keep in the long run, even after this pandemic. No? Let's make sure that our schools are resilient. But what do we mean by resilient? No? There are two ways of thinking about resilient, and they're captured by two metaphors. No? The first metaphor on the left, that's in case you don't know what it is, it's a bunch of pillows. No? And on the right side, you have a bamboo, the usual bamboo. No? The two images express to us two different kinds of resilience. The pillow, if you punch a pillow, what happens? It has the capacity to get back into its original shape. That's resilience A. That's not the resilience we want. That's not the resilience we need as educational institutions. We don't want to be able to bounce back to shape. We don't want to be able to bounce back to the pre-pandemic time. No? Rather, we want to be like the bamboo. The bamboo is flexible. No? The bamboo is bends. It's resilient because it bends to whatever is needed. I think we learned so much. No? We learned so much in terms of being resilient, being flexible, being adaptable. To be resilient, we want to be adaptable. We want to be flexible. No? Here's a very interesting graph from the UNESCO McKinsey report, which we'll share with you later. No? And in this graph, basically, on the left side, you will see the left side, you have the school's capacity to be open for in-person students or not. No? So you have schools fully open and schools fully closed. That's where we are now, schools fully closed. No? But on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, you have schools unable to offer remote learning. No? And at the other end, the ideal is schools able to fully offer remote learning. According to McKinsey and UNESCO, to be resilient is to be able to offer learning continuity. No? So as you can see, number three, no, the number three types of schools, and I'm hoping our schools can be that. No? They are high in person capacity. No? They can accommodate people on campus because they have the facilities. No? Most of us are like that. But they're also high in remote learning capacity. Hopefully, that's where we are now. We've improved no, in our capacity to offer remote learning. If we are high in both, our capacity to switch between the two is also high. No? And as a result, we're able to offer resilient learning community. I think that should be our goal, no? Especially after all the lessons learned and after all the skills that we were able to acquire last year. No? So I hope we can exercise resilience through flexibility, no? Being able to switch from remote learning and in-person learning. Because hopefully the time will come very soon. No? Hopefully people can come back on campus sooner than later. No? But hopefully we will not forget our capacity to offer remote learning. So whatever else happens, we will be more resilient. Or as some people say, we will be anti-fragile. No? We will be agile. There are many terms out there that are nice. You may want to choose your own term. But basically, it means being resilient by being flexible. And by flexible, we mean you're able to offer learning in person or you're able to offer it remotely in the long run permanently so that people can switch from one to the other. Okay. The talk is called Adjusting to the New Normal, no? The different teaching and learning with the new normal. But there's a term that I think is a better term than the new normal, and it's called the new possible. No? I think I got this from McKinsey as well. No? They're calling the new normal the new possible. I think it's a more optimistic term. First of all, we don't know what the new normal is. No? And what do you do about the new normal? The most you can do is adjust to it. You're adjusting to a normal that you have no idea what it's going to look like. But what about the new possible? What are possibilities? We don't adjust to possibilities. We define possibilities. And I think our schools, despite our constraints, after 1 year of traumatic adjustments, fumbling and scampering around to respond to the needs brought about by the pandemic, we're in a position to define the new possible. What is the new possible for my school? It's a different answer for every institution. No? For my institution, what is the new possible? Rather than just simply adjusting to a new normal that I can't even imagine really. No? So the main question we need to answer, I think, is what proactive, not just reactive, what proactive strategic choices can we make about the education we will offer based on what we've learned last year? So I think, again, the challenge continues. We were hoping we could rest by now, but the challenge continues. But the challenge can also be exciting. No? And as long as we pace ourselves and take care of ourselves and take care of our stakeholders, I think we'll be able to face the challenge. No? I like this saying, no? You didn't come this far to only come this far. You know, we've gone so far. If you look back at the last year, we've received so many blessings. No? There have been a lot of problems. There have been many issues that continue to haunt us, many challenges. And there are more issues and challenges. No? But let's remember, we didn't come this far only to come this far. We've learned so much. No? We've become flexible. We've become resilient. We've learned so much. We've become better educators. No? And we can try to go farther. No? We can try to go another extra mile to be better educators. In closing, I just want to congratulate and thank my fellow educators, all of you, because I think we've been through a year of very difficult challenges. No? But I've seen a lot of heroic efforts on the part of educators, no? Especially our colleagues in the public schools, but all of us, no? Especially administrators who had to carry the burden of leadership in these very difficult times. I just want to commend all of us and congratulate all of us, no? And be grateful that we were able to respond quite well, given all our constraints and context, no, to the challenges of the pandemic. And I wish everyone will be able to respond even more in the times to come. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Father Johnny, for that very, very rich sharing of your knowledge, experience, and expertise on teaching learning modalities that we need to consider as we adapt to the evolving challenges of the new possible. The models that you shared with us, the traditional face-to-face, blended, flex, hybrid or blended, hybrid, online plus, and virtual. The initial question you posed, which model or combination of models is most suitable for your context, will surely inform the decisions that our schools will have to make. We are both challenged and excited. We all hope that we can be as resilient as bamboos as we make the right choice in offering learning continuity to realize our educational goals fully. Friends, we now have a few minutes for questions that you may want to direct to Father Johnny. Many thanks for the very productive noise in the chat box as Father Johnny was doing his sharing. Again, we kindly request that you use the chat feature of Zoom to raise your questions. I have noted some questions posted during your talk, Father Johnny, and I imagine there will be more coming in. Of course, there were a lot of thank yous, and there were a lot of how people are challenged and how they appreciate what you talked about. May I begin with Maria Fe Abehar of CDU said, is it possible to have two groups of teachers, one who will handle the online and the other will be for the on-site? Your thoughts on this, Father?
Yes, by all means. No, as I said, flexibility is the name of the game. Customization. So, if, for example, for your school, you have excellent teachers who are best suited for the face-to-face, and you have excellent teachers best suited for online. By all means, make the most of them. No, so yeah, be as creative and flexible as possible. There's no one formulaic, answer solution. That's a very creative solution, actually, that shows optimal use of the resources in your school. So I'd like to encourage us, identify your strengths and make the most of them.
Thank you, Father. From Maridel Isulat of SJI, can the government mandate schools, private schools especially, to really go back to in-person or face-to-face teaching, or do we have the option to decide depending on our context?
First, I think we have to ask the government that, but given the guidelines, I think the guidelines do say that the institutions have an option. No? They're encouraging us to go on site, I think, but there are guidelines. There are only guidelines, and I think there is a clear clause there that says no one is really required, no, because iba talagang konteksto natin.
Yes, thank you, Father. The government really, we will have to ask the government, no? Clifford Esteban from St. Joseph's College. This is more a thought, Father, rather than a question, and maybe you can comment on this. Transition plans should also address re-entry anxiety issues of students, parents, and even school personnel. Any thoughts, Father?
No, I absolutely agree with you. No, that's why it's important to talk to stakeholders. No, how do they feel? Do they feel excited or eager? Do they feel excited or eager, or do they feel apprehensive and worried? No, so we cannot assume. No, for example, when I talked to my class yesterday over Zoom, I just asked them very quickly to put on the chat box. All of them are excited, no? But but we don't know about other students or faculty or other school personnel or parents. So it's really important to, I think, engage them. No? By the way, at this point, I'd like to upload a file. It's a 2-page PDF that sort of summarizes the questions, no, and the some of the key points that I talked about. So feel free to use it and to download and share with other people. No?
Thank you, Father, because there have been many questions on how we can get a copy of this talk, or at least your main points. So I'm sure that makes a lot of people very happy. If anybody has questions or comments, you may either raise your hand. You may either use the raise hand icon, or you can put your question or comments in the chat box. Father, you've probably read some of them as well. I'd like to read a question now, just came in from Michael James Busa. Medical education has a unique problem facing its educational system. The difficulty of keeping our faculty in medical education from burnout when they have a fight on two fronts, academic teaching and clinical practice. Many of our faculty have redirected their focus on the fight against this pandemic. This is aside from the faculty being sidelined from sickness of COVID. Second, the cases our clinical students face are limited. Their clinical exposure is limited to avoid COVID infection. Any comments, Father?
Maybe just hats off to our medical educators, no? Because I didn't realize that until Michael mentioned it, no? That it's true. When you think about it, the doctors also have their clinical practice. And of course, the health workers, the frontliners, they have their hands full already just attending to this pandemic. But they have this extra mission, no, of educating future medical practitioners. So I just want to, acknowledge the heroism and the sacrifice, no, that our medical educators are making, no. So yeah.
This next one, Father, might be a little bit controversial. This is from Maria Yvette Greffiel, Sacred Heart School, Tacloban. What are your thoughts about those who really do not like to be vaccinated? Are we going to accept them to come to school?
Thankfully, the guidelines that have come out so far require full vaccination for adults 18 years old and above. No? And for that reason, and I agree with that, I think it's important for us to require vaccination, no? Because we have a responsibility to all our students, faculty, that they are not made susceptible to infection. No? So hopefully the government will be the bad guy to say that, to require us. No, but if the government does not, I think the administrators will have to go to their non-negotiables. No, if health and safety is a non-negotiable, I think it's a no-brainer whether you're going to require vaccination, full vaccination or not. No, so that's a good example of how defining our non-negotiables can help us sort of talk about go through the tensions, no, and resolve the polarities.
Right. Father, because there was I was talking to somebody yesterday, and her concern was, she was saying, what about teachers who have young unvaccinated children at home? So if they go back to school, on-site learning, they will be putting their children, in a sense, at risk, especially for those who need to commute, no?
Right. In fact, that's why this is the more controversial part, I think. That's why I think we need to ask our faculty.
Yes.
No? Because you don't have to require everyone to come to class. No, it's possible to come up with a model where faculty can continue online teaching because they're good at that, and there's a need for that. No, I'm not saying you cannot require everyone. You may actually decide that for our school, given our context, all the faculty should come in. It's possible to do that. No, but it's important to have a conversation about it.
And if I remember correctly, Father, this was one of the questions that you said should be considered, no? To really consider the stakeholders, parents, teachers, and students. Father,
by the way, let me just clarify. The handout is not the slides. The handout is a PDF, no? But what I can do is I can print out the slides later and post it, no? Yeah. I would also like to, if you don't mind, I'd also like to put a link, no, to the UNICEF and the UNESCO and McKinsey study. I just put a couple of links, if you don't mind, because I think part of the importance for us to do our own research, but it's also important, I think, to sort of curate what's out there, because there's so much out there. No, so I'd like to post 2 links that might be helpful to some of our educators and administrators. No, and so a number of schools have used these links, and we find these links very helpful. No? So here's another one, no, from, I think this is from ADB, from Asian Development Bank. Okay.
Thank you, Father. I'm sure that will be very much appreciated. Thank you. There's another one here from Gilbert Tumibay of AUF. Resilience is important in implementing the proper model and delivering quality instruction. How do we manage burnout of faculty members for those schools with 21 to 24 units of teaching assignments?
I don't know the answer to that question, but it's good that that concern is being raised, because that's important. No? But one of the insights I think that we were able to glean from our experience is that in the long run, we may need to reconfigure the job of the teacher. No?
Right.
Because before the pandemic, we thought of a teacher to a class. No? But I think what surfaced in the pandemic is that the teacher actually has multiple tasks, no, that need not be concentrated in one person. For example, you have a content specialist, that's usually the role of the teacher. You have a course designer. You have a multimedia creator. No? You have an online facilitator. So those are 4 distinct tasks that need not be fulfilled by one person. It'll be great if one teacher can do all of the 4, but it's rather difficult to do that. No? So one of the, I think, long-term questions we in the educational institutions have to think about is, do we need to reconfigure the job description of the teacher to make the most? For example, if a teacher is a content specialist, no? That person may not be a good facilitator, or may not be a good course designer. Maybe you can have a team that's doing the course designing, but consulting the specialist. No? So there are creative ways of, I think, addressing that issue. Again, I don't have a solution. I don't know the answer to the question, but those are important questions to us in the long run. So maybe to break up into chunks the current job description of the teacher, because the online platform has shown that each chunk is substantial enough to be assumed by other people. And there's greater collaboration possible.
Thank you, Father, for that. There's another one here from Harold Bueno of FEU Cavite. Thank you, Father, for your presentation. How are these multiple learning modalities you presented? How will they impact? I don't know if this is a question for PAASCU or for you, Father. How will these impact accreditation, the instruments, process, preparation, and adjustments? Will it mean
I think for that question, we need to call on Brother Dodo.
Yeah, Brother Dodo. Brother Dodo or Sir Rick Palo, would you like to take this question, sir?
Yes, I think our new instrument lends itself to more flexibility because unlike before, our instruments are basically checklists of good practices. No? Now our instruments are really based on more generic standards of quality, and there are certain criteria that are in the form of questions. No? So the school can, in a way, narrate their context, their experiences, and the rationale behind the adoption of a certain process. For example, under teaching learning, we don't prescribe a particular modality. We are just asking what is the modality, what's the reason for adopting it, and what are the results. How effective is that modality being implemented? That's why there are more rooms for flexibility in the new instrument. But there will still be a lot of discussion, and again, taking from Father Johnny's advice, more consultation on how we will conduct accreditation. I am also thinking that our accreditation process will have to adopt on the school's basic teaching learning modality. So that's as far as I can do. But I think there is a promise of the new instrument, because the new instrument is not anymore prescriptive.
Right. Thank you, Sir Rick. Father, there's another. Yes, Father.
Before the question, I just want to say I'm going to now upload the slides.
Yes.
So for those who want the whole thing, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, there's one here, Father, from Darwin Rungduin of Letran. Often gradual opening or resumption is being mentioned. Any thoughts on how gradual the transition from online to limited face-to-face should, will, or might take?
Again, a lot of it depends on the conditions of the pandemic, but also on the readiness of the school and the institution. So, as I said earlier, if the current mode of learning being offered is problematic, I think the school or university should try harder to hasten the process of bringing back students. But if it's generally okay, to really deliberate and be prudent in bringing back what will have value added. So don't just bring back everyone, but make sure that it's a more purposeful way of transitioning to the face-to-face. So the duration will really depend on the schools, and in a sense we can say that the government's leaving that to the school. How fast you want to go back.
Yeah. Thank you, Father. This one is not so much a question as it is a comment. It's high time also to redefine the role of a supervisor, instructional leader in a hybrid or flex setup. Any comment on that, Father?
Oh, that's absolutely right. I didn't think about that, but it's true. For example, if the responsibility of the faculty will be recalibrated, certainly those who are overseeing the work should also undergo some revision. Again, I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. But I think what's important is that we sort of keep those questions in mind as we reimagine what Philippine education will look like after this pandemic. Because that's what we're hoping to do. We're hoping to, I think it's also the UN that came up with the 3 steps of response to the pandemic, recovery, and rejuvenation. We want to rejuvenate the Philippine education, but we need to reimagine it. And part of the reimagination that's going to be difficult is recalibrating the job description of the faculty. and also the supervisor.
Yes, it's really a lot of new things in this new possible, no, Father? If there are, in the interest of time, if there are more questions, would it be all right, Father, if we forward them to you? We just forward the
Sure.
questions to you. Yes, and at this point, Father, I'd like to present to you the plaque of appreciation from PAASCU. Allow me, please, to read the citation on the plaque of appreciation. To Father Johnny Go. The Philippine Accrediting Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities presents the plaque of appreciation to Father Johnny Go for his invaluable service rendered as resource speaker in one of the learning sessions on the topic Adapting Teaching Learning Modalities to the New Normal, held during the Annual General Assembly on November 26, 2021. Signed, Brother Edmundo L. Fernandez, FSC President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you also for all the questions and all the learning shared over the chat box and the comment section. Thank you very much, everyone.
Maraming salamat po.